Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have with me Professor Gautam Sen. And for those of you who saw his last podcast, I know all of you became a fan. I have him back. Sir keeps communicating with me his ideas, and one thing struck me when he sent a message. It struck me like a bolt of lightning. And I think my response to Sir was in seconds that I need to talk to you about this. Sir said something. How do we make Hindutva a reality? And that is something that we want to talk about. We all thought Hindutva has arisen, but this election told us something different. It has arisen, not fully. So let's find out what is the reality. Namaskar, sir. Thank you so much. And I'm so eagerly waiting to listen to what you have to say.
Thank you for inviting me to talk to your audience. I know you have a lot of people viewing and listening in. So let me begin at the beginning. As most of your viewers and others will know, I am a supporter of the incumbent government and very happy with how they have sought to transform the economy in the last decade. I'm also very impressed with the way India's foreign policy has been handled. We have basically the best foreign minister in the world. I don't think there's anybody in his class. The Chinese and the Russians have very good foreign minister, but I think Mr. Jaishankar also has charm, which the others don't.
He takes
He
the
has
cake, sir.
bags of charm in addition to his razor sharp intellect. So I'm very happy, and I also am very much aware from long years that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself is very astute on foreign policy. Many people think this is something new. It is not. Narendra Modi has shown that he has a grave understanding of issues when he traveled to the United States and met congressional leaders before he became chief minister. So he has form in this area. So it is a very good team, and of course we have also Mr. Ajit Doval, and I know that our team, at the senior level in the foreign ministry is very, very good. I've known many of them. Many of them are my friends, and they're all pretty classy. They know what the business. So great team, but they've always said to me, we need good leadership. The IFS officer said we need good leadership, and that is what they had. And they have really handled a complicated situation very well. We have to keep good relations with countries which are sworn enemies of each other, who get angry with each other, who get angry with us. And we have, on the whole, handled it well. It's precarious all the time, but so I am very satisfied and congratulate our government on the economic foreign policy, economic transformation point. Well, I don't think we have achieved as much in the preceding several hundred years, what we managed in one decade. Okay, the roots go back to 1991, and Atal Bihari Vajpayee between 1999 and 2004 gave it a big boost, and the Congress benefited from his policies because some of those things actually unfolded after 2004. But anyway, thank God Modi ji is back now, and he will continue his good work. And already we have now grown at 8.25. I think it'll be less. But the great achievement of Modi Sarkar, I keep saying to people, he has done a magic trick by combining significant effort in infrastructure building with looking after the disadvantaged with welfare measures. Even his enemies say he's the most socialist prime minister we've had, in fact, ever. So this is actually a magnificent trick that he has managed to look after the people. And I won't go through the list of things he has done. Everything from water being piped into your home to gas cylinders to bank accounts, Sauchalaya, both sare cheez hua, and there's more to come, including housing, which is going to get a big boost. But there are areas in which, for some mystifying reason, there seems to be hesitation. And some of my conversations with people who are close to policymaking have provided me with plausible reasons why these things have not been implemented. But I was not convinced. So let me articulate some of the areas. I think the biggest area really is our hesitancy with taking the issue of the narrative bull by the horns. I know there are lots of podcast channels, something 20 years ago, nobody on the Hindutva side ever had. The media was really, Lutins and Khan Market. And that has changed. Yes, there are so many channels and so many people. So the cat is often out of the bag when they're lying and deceitful. They get found out. So that's good. Many things are being said. But, ultimately, to make a major advance, there needs to be official sponsorship. I think the public broadcasts are not bad. There are good long discussions, but they're quite academic, and I think people like me enjoy them. But maybe it is not for the average person. What I would say, the narrative issues are the following: we still live in a colonial world. Our consciousness is a colonial consciousness. All our political parties, and I repeat, all, are imbued with some sort of colonial consciousness, even if they're unaware of it. Some of these ideas they have actually are Victorian prejudices which have come back in a different guise. So we need to think afresh. And I've written about this in detail about how we might do it. On the narrative front, the most urgent, and I'm afraid I know what efforts have been made and how mediocre they have been, is to change the school curriculum in the social sciences and history most of all. I believe there is some movement in this direction now as we speak. I'm delighted to hear that. 15 years ago, I would have said, who will do it? That is not an issue anymore. We have lots of very good scholars of global ranking, to name but a few, whether it is Vikram Sampath, Meenakshi Jain, even Sai in some respects would have a contribution. Sanjeev Sanyal has written a magnificent book on revolutionaries. So the team is there, and Conrad L, sitting far away, will come back very quickly, who's done so much work over so many decades at such high cost to his own career. So there is no issue. It will take 6 months to a year to revise the history textbooks. Less. I believe a plan has been submitted to the government by an established organization run by the World Hindu Congress, which has started master's courses in Indic studies, which have received approval. So this can be done. We can argue and debate how much, but some of the changes are so obvious and so uncontroversial that I can't see why we are waiting. For example, some of the discourse in the history books isn't just blatant fabrication. That can be done away with, and we can ignore the protests. And the other area which Sanjeev and Vikram have been working on lately is the omissions, the huge omissions. Why do we not know about the great rulers of Assam, the great Cholas? And I could go on and on. And the people we talk about most are the Mughals. But think about it. Unhindered Mughal rule lasted really from the end of Akbar's reign in the early 17th century to about the midway to Aurangzeb's reign. That was the paramountcy and the great heights. And I'm talking about 1670. By then, already it was under challenge from the Marathas, then the Jats and the Sikhs. So this 100-year period seems to be all we want to know about our history. This 100-year period is overdone and it is misrepresented. So, this change in the history syllabus is very urgent. The government ought to have had if you like, a party political interest, though it has nothing to do with party politics. It's to do with refreshing and renewing our historical studies, which is, if a new generation had been exposed to some serious and thoughtful historical course material by, say, 2015, early 2016, you would have had a new generation of young voters who would have been thinking more carefully about the nation and about its future, rather than having a reflex of being annoyed that ye nahi mila. You remember Bajpayee lost because onion prices had gone up. Just before the election, they had shot up. Now, this kind of nonsense would have been mitigated. People still get angry about how changes affect them. Unavoidable. But if they had a grounding in the sense of their nationhood and its future and how it was being built, I think the BJP might have got more votes in May this year. A lot of young people who are now unemployed may have thought, ठीक है, देश तो आगे बढ़ रहा है, हम थोड़ा इंतजार करने के लिए तैयार है. Because everything is about giving the government time. 10 years is a very short period in the life of a country. And this is the kind of consciousness we need. Now, it is very easy for me to say, and for you, I'm sure, because we have relative comfort. We don't worry about where next week's or next month's food is coming from and how our rent is going to be paid. I understand ordinary people are under a lot more pressure, and one must be very mindful and humble. But there is no harm in exposing them to the fact that our country is going forward at a pretty remarkable pace. And सिर्फ 10 साल बाकी है. 10 साल में हम पहुंच जाएंगे. In 10 years' time, the roots of our new institutions will be so solid, it won't matter who comes to power. They won't be able to reverse it. An industrialist from Tamil Nadu who works in Bangalore, Hyderabad, he said something quite obvious to me, which hadn't occurred to me. He said, Dekho, already business and industry has become so prominent in terms of our economic achievements that they have clout. No government will go so crazy as to upset them. So there is a constraint on how madly anybody can behave. We will not become like Venezuela. That's what his argument was. That Venezuela went completely berserk. Places like Portland in America, San Francisco have adopted the Venezuela model. And he said, हमारे देश में नहीं होने वाले हैं, because now industry is very well established. They are much more influential than they ever were. And there is a rational framework which they support, which is not to say that they should not be subject to rules of competition, most of all, good behavior, but they will stop people going mad. So I will still like to pose the question to the government, why not a good narrative? The effort they made, I'll reveal this now, though it's come confidentially, was given a 3-month window to happen. I won't even say which year. They proposed this in October and they wanted it done by January, and not for social science and history, but for everything. For everything. So this was not a serious venture. I won't tell you much more about what went wrong. They had good people, for example, our Fields Medal winner from Princeton, Sudha Murthy was in the committee, etc., etc. But this was not a serious effort. And the pity is, it is easily done, and it will not be too controversial. There will be protests, but are there people who are not going to protest? The adversaries find nothing good about this government. The adversaries sitting in Berkeley, Columbia, Chicago, UPenn, Oxford, वो तो गाली देने वाले हैं, no matter what you do. In fact, one distinguished economist, who is a friend of mine, actually, who's in London right now, he said, anybody but Modi. He actually said in a tweet, anybody but Modi. Now, he's a very distinguished thinker, very highly regarded. How can you engage with these people on a rational discussion? Sambhav nahi hai. Because, so I asked him, so you are happy with Mamata? Oh, he was happy with Mamata, by the way, because his mentor was a great supporter of Mamata to be prime minister. His mentor, the Nobel laureate. So don't worry about upsetting these people. You will never be able to reach out to them. The Sun, for a long time, people have said very maliciously about them, why do they want certificates from their enemies? There is some truth in this, I'm afraid. There is some truth. And they need to grow up and be more confident. Then, once you've done this with our course correction in our history curriculum, most of all, and social science, so we create citizens and not people who are obsessed with their linguistic identity, their caste identity, which is why I love the fact that when Sai Deepak was asked, where are you from? He says, I'm an Indian from Tamil Nadu. He doesn't say I'm a Tamil from India. So that's what I always say. But I don't even say my Bengali because I'm so mad with my Bengali Bhadralok, Buddhijivis they call them, that I always say I was born in Benares. That's where I come from, UP. I'm so ashamed with so many of my Bengali contemporaries. कोई बात नहीं है. उसके बाद मैं कहूँगा एक बात, which is again a bit difficult to do on a practical level, because you need time and some resources. I would say, school reform, because, south of the Vindhyas, in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere, for approximately the same per capita spending per pupil, people who emerge from school can entertain the hope of going to university. This is not the case if you do north of India's,
Mm.
UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh. It is changing. It is getting better. So one should acknowledge it is getting better and serious efforts are being made. But there is a big gap. So you have to ask what it is that is wrong. One thing which is a symptom of what's wrong is almost two-thirds of people in places like UP want to do commerce and the arts. In Tamil Nadu, it is STEM. Two-thirds want to go into STEM. That's a very interesting contrast. Now, why is it that they all want to do commerce and arts in UP? Because they want to do the UPSC. That is the background, that we want to get a government job. Whereas we have to now switch this around. Now, Sanjeev Sanyal has said something very eloquent, and I was reminded of this, though we've been aware of it. He said, some of the best and the brightest spent 2 years preparing for the UPSC, enriching all these training colleges, which are often run by rascals, and some of them are ex-IS officers.
Yep.
बहुत सारे बदमाश लोग इसमें हैं. सब नहीं से है. Hey, less than 1% will make it into the IS. What a waste of time for so many clever people. Huh? Better to be an entrepreneur. Do something else. Even criminal activity would be a more paying proposition than spending 2 whole years doing something for which you're guaranteed not to succeed. So, ye ek baat hai. Now, I would start by doing something very simple, and this I think prime ministers will sympathize with. And I say this because my wife is a leading educationist of troubled children and gifted children, and she has much experience. And she agrees with me that half an hour of yoga in the morning improves the learning skills of students for the rest of the day. And it has been tried out.
Massively so.
Because she's from our part of the world, she's from Nepal. She's much more sensitive to this, and she has taught some of the most difficult special needs people, autistic, bipolar, etc., etc. And she said it simply changes your person, gives you focus. So now this is a bit difficult to do because you need teachers. So what I would do, I would train teachers in schools, online if need be, to start with. So some yoga. I also think they should experiment with the self-learning of pupils. I would spend half the day out of 5 in one day training teachers. Teacher training is very poor in India. And in some places like Nepal, they don't exist. So teacher training, half a day, very important. And in that half a day, you can create systems where the children compete with each other in STEM subjects. And there are some very clever people in India churning out wonderful games which you can play on your smartphone or your laptop. And I know a couple who've been doing it now for 10 years in Pune. They were IT wizards who've given up to do this out of commitment. And you let the kids compete with each other with these games in sciences, maths, for that half day when teachers are being trained. You will be amazed how much this competition will create skills in them. Do a pilot somewhere in one village to see how it works out. I think we have to really upgrade our learning. The other thing, I was with an educationist yesterday, very successful guy from Konkani with a Spanish wife. They both worked for the World Bank. She was my student 20 years ago. My God, 25 years ago. And very successful couple. He's involved in India's fintech from Portland. That's why I refer to Portland. And she is an educationist as well. And she was saying, investment in early education is much more important than primary and secondary. Primary, yes, but more important than secondary. You have to prepare the children by the time they're 5 and 7. This is where you have to impart the basic skills. And then, they become self-learners to a degree. So even if there's a measure of neglect later on, they at least come prepared to adapt to whatever circumstances they encounter. So I would say our budgetary distribution needs a rethink. Again, do a pilot. Nothing very difficult to do. And we must improve our learning skills and our vocational skills and training skills. And we have people who can, particularly at the vocational level, offer incredible quality training. I worked with some people, oh God, it must be 9 years ago. And somebody was going to set up a huge training program across India. It didn't come off. He was going to invest 1,000 crores setting up training schools across India. And I said to him, do it in a backward tribal area of Madhya Pradesh, the hardest one. But the economics were very difficult. But, we went to Singapore to examine. In fact, we were asked by the boss to go and check out Singapore. And one of the things I found at a meeting I held in the actual railway ministry, chaired by Suresh Prabhu, there were some very clever people running these programs in India. And they had a good model. So you have to scale this up. And I know government is now focused on training, quite rightly. And then, you have people who really understand the problem, like, Manish Sabarwal of that company called Lease something something. He has a real grasp of the problem in the round. And as he says, our problem is not employment as much as low productivity. This is an old story. Even the late economist Montek's wife, my God, how could I forget her name? Montek Ahluwalia's wife, Ishwar Ahluwalia. She wrote about this in 1986. So we have to somehow get this to the policy level. Beyond that, when we say Hindutva, what do we mean? What does it actually mean in practical terms? That terrifies so many people. What can it mean? It will mean this voluntary yoga in schools. That's Hindutva. You create the person who will adapt to the world outside, because that to me is a prerequisite to create the new human being, yoga and meditation. Because that is how you have to start and catch them young. They will turn out to be better human beings, better for themselves, and better for the people around them. The three qualities which we are taught we need in our ancient literature are selflessness, courage, and humility. Now, yoga is a prerequisite to start moving in that direction. The goal is not to get there. This is a big mistake, that we will get there. We will not get there. We will always be striving to get there. And the striving is enough. Now, then I thought about this problem. Selflessness, what does it mean? It means something very difficult. It means, can you treat a total stranger as if they were your own family? Now, that's a tall order. That is what selflessness really means at the individual level. So I said to myself, ये तो संभव नहीं है, हम ही नहीं कर सकते, कोई भी नहीं कर पाएंगे. Then I thought, no, there's a solution to this, a very simple one. If through the year I manage to do this 3-4 times, to be truly selfless in this way, and everybody does it occasionally, it will become an epidemic. Each person who has experienced selflessness will reciprocate to somebody else. So we have to just make a start with being selfless occasionally. We will never approach the level of treating the children of third parties like our own. This is too tall an order. But we will get better at it, you see. I mean, I treat anybody's child as my child. So it is possible. It's just that we've never done it, so we think it's not possible. Then the question of humility, I think that's possible. I know a lot of people whose humility is deeply moving. I always embarrass my friend Professor Prashant Singh, who's a great Hindutva intellectual. And I say to him, you are the most dharmic person I've met. And your humility, he's extremely talented. He was one of the people who invented the internet for Microsoft in the 90s. Hugely accomplished, but you will never guess to meet him. He's so unassuming. And the man who's now our CA is a bit like that, Satvik. Let me embarrass him by naming Ananta is a bit like that, Two extraordinary people. Yes. Not just smart, a remarkable human being. I'm so happy that Vivek Devroy, and Finance Secretary Somnathan are running our affairs. The three best people you could have, both as human beings and in skill. So I have now outed them and embarrassed them. So let us start in small ways. Now, one prerequisite which I cannot fathom, and yesterday I had a very disappointing conversation about this. How do we free our temples? Now, I've been involved with this since 2006, when I was the UK stroke European representative for the Hindu Dharmacharya Asava when Dayanand Saraswati was the general secretary. Uh, and he, of course, was the intellectual inspiration, a remarkable man, as we all know. Um, and I worked with the general secretary, who's a retired IS officer, and one person who's now completely disappeared. She has stopped being active, a remarkable woman from Chennai called Radha Rajan. She is now ceased to be active.
Yeah.
In fact, she wrote that wonderful book on NGOs, which was actually launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That book was launched by him. So, three of us and one or two others, we sat down in Los Angeles because we were having a conference there, and the paper was put together. Nothing came of it. Few years ago, I submitted a paper, I won't name to whom, a very senior person, having consulted with Swamiji, Prashant, Professor Shah, so that it was technically and practically feasible. No response. No response. But I was given to understand they were thinking about this in 2017. So I'm mightily puzzled that I was actually told, we are thinking about it. Tell us, what do you think? I would say it's very difficult. And the paper I submitted takes all this on board that, and yesterday somebody very important told me, sab chori ho jayega. The trustees will steal the donations and they'll sell off the land. And yes, that's a danger. But he said at least the civil servants are subject to some discipline. I am not sure that is 100% correct. But I see the point that ordinary people out there. But what I would have suggested is pick 12 of the most important mandirs. 12. Don't change the law. Only make 2 or 3 minor modifications. One modification would be all the income must be spent on mandir affairs. And if something has to be spent on administration, it should not be more than 2 to 3%. So the government should not scoop up a large share under the guise of doing this or that. It should be all spent. Then 2 more things need to be specified. One is the salaries of priests need to be agreed. Now, that will differ, so you may need to have a scale depending on the significance and size of the mandir. Obviously, some of them will be paid better, but some of them are paid so badly. Children are no longer wanting to go into the priesthood because you cannot live on that. And that is something they need to address. And thirdly, to have some strong guidelines of how the money is to be spent, which will include 2 things: training of priests and educational activities. Some of our greatest mandirs, like Sharda Peeth and the one that is opening in Nalanda, these were actually universities. Worship and bhakti were important, but first and foremost, they were centers of learning. You see, this is where, Advaita Vedanta flourished, knowledge, and we should restore that. And really, if you want to get away from our colonial past, we must make a start with this kind of learning, that some of the gifted people are not determined to go to Ivy League or Oxbridge. They feel happy to stay in these places. And there are some who are doing it actually. In fact, some who've been to Ivy League and come back and joined this. I noticed, much to my admiration, that you want to go to this. We have such a corpus of learning. And the only other area of Western thought that I'll accommodate in the syllabus is philosophy. Philosophy I will accommodate, but there's a very amusing story about this. Arindam Chakrabarti, whose name you may have heard, professor of philosophy at New York University, a very distinguished scholar, who has some actually magnificent podcasts. The one which is very badly recorded, but one of his best, is on Vivekananda and love. And that is something worth watching. Professor Arindam Chakrabarti of New York University. He comes from a mandir background. He used to even cook. And then he went to Oxford and did a doctorate with 2 of the most distinguished British philosophers of his time. And also he was very close to our philosopher, Bimal Matilal, whom I knew very well. He actually wrote a book on Western philosophy in Sanskrit for our priests, some of our leading Sanskrit scholars. On reading that book, they said, "Is that all?" They say, is that all they have to say? So that that is just not dismissive thing. It's apocryphal. It tells you something.
Yeah.
So we have been at it for much longer than them. Okay, the Greeks were there, but we have also been at it for a very, very long time. And I think reviving this learning is a healing process for us. Not everybody will do it, but we need a corpus of scholars. And yesterday, the gentleman I was with, a very distinguished man, is actually promoting this, and he has the official clout to get somewhere, and he's already done it. He's trained lawyers on Vedic law and how Nyaya and other shastras vary from Western law. Very, very good ideas. We need to make a start. We need a Princeton Institute of Advanced Studies. I'm afraid Observer, as good as it is not enough. We need high-powered intellectual work, not contemporary issues being covered. We need people to spend 5 years writing a book that will change the way we look at the world. This is what is lacking. Of course, there are scholars who do that. The greatest living political historian of India, Professor Venkat Tulipala, did that with that book on the partition.
Yep.
Now he's doing a second book, which I understand will be even more significant in his contribution to scholarship. So we need this kind of work, and we're all in a hurry. And, in a way, this is to do with the fact that we are mostly relatively poor compared to Western scholars. We don't have all souls where they find a gifted mind and say, you do what you like and you think what you like, and your upkeep is taken care of till you die. And upkeep is a full professorial salary, accommodation, free food in the home. And you think about what you think is interesting. No, we need a few of those. We are a country with enough resources to do that. To start with, I'd recommend find a university which is shut, or even a reasonable hotel in a good place like Ooty or wherever, or Manali or Kasauli, and invite some leading scholars for 3 months to interact and produce papers in those 3 months, just for 3 months. Then they can go back to their jobs and cover their sabbatical. If they're taking leave and they're losing $25,000, cover it. But set the agenda of what are the areas you want to cover. What is happening now abroad is Indian social science and history is really being dictated instrumentally by people on the left. 99% in Oxbridge, UPenn, Harvard, and it's in the hands of scholars who have strong official ties with the foreign ministries and foreign chancelleries. This is not just scholarship. This is really instrumental stuff. And as I keep saying, you apply for a scholarship to do something on caste, you're very likely to get it. Something on women's oppression, you'll be given a scholarship. On human rights, you'll get money. And the kind of people they are appointing to their most senior chairs in India are really so hostile, not just to Modi, but the whole idea of Indic civilization, that it is shocking. It is shocking. In fact, they have just appointed somebody, I mentioned this in my earlier talk, to Oxford, to the most senior chair and a fellowship at All Souls. One should just look at her stuff on Narendra Modi. I'm prepared to read it carefully, and I have an open mind. And even if I don't like it and I don't want to talk about it afterwards, I will recognize a serious critique. Even if I think for political reasons I should keep quiet, I will not repudiate it. But it is so appalling, and it's so contrived. Now, this is what we have to break, because what is happening abroad, and I'm afraid some of these scholars are very good at what they do. Very good. And it is not simply that they are critiquing any aspect of Hindutva as such. A much more significant issue, in my opinion, is their choice of research subjects. They talk about issues which are of relatively marginal importance to the development and self-awareness of our civilization. And in a way, what happens to them, there's a dialogue going on in the top journals on a subject. Then you're obligated to join this dialogue if you want to be part of this coterie. So if people are talking about certain things in a certain way, a new scholar will automatically be corrupted by that, because that is the dialogue that you cannot go into a room full of Tamil speakers and start speaking in Hindi. And it's not that these are bad people, they become bad later on, because then they get captured by this kind of discourse. So you have to break away from this. And our scholarship in social sciences is shamefully of foreign origin. It is not from India. We just take it down second hand. Almost all of it, even the top universities, they generate very little authentic work, even JNU, TIS, all of them ultimately are second-hand copies of UPenn, Harvard, Oxford. And they will sell their mother to be invited to a seminar in Oxford. They will sell their jati for a one-year fellowship. They will sell their country for a job. I know people who were earning $25,000 in Calcutta who are now on salary of $250,000 plus magnificent accommodation in New York. It is worth being a traitor just for the accommodation. Columbia has some fabulous accommodation for the academics. So there are a lot of people. Now, you tell me if my salary goes from $25,000 to $250,000, it is not corrupting. I'm sorry. It is. This is our problem. We now need to recover this. Now, the one venture which was started in Gurgaon as a more Hindutva, I'm afraid, has been captured by left liberals, been captured from what I see. And I see good scholars doing good work. At least two I know of, very good work. They are struggling because they don't have patrons. No, one of them, by some miracle, has earned some patronage so he can take time off research. But he is very, very good and he's quite young. Somebody needs to buy him out for 5 years. So he doesn't teach, he just does research. I'm saying that as a scholar from the London School of Economics, I don't apply modest standards. I'm thinking of very rigorous scholarship. And this young man is very, very good. And there are very few who are of this caliber. And there are others out there that we don't know about. We need to create a system of identifying them and then funding them. We need to take our scholarship back. Who do we copy? We copy the worst example and the most successful one, China. Chinese scholarship is generated in China, not in Harvard. China dominates all scholarship of all historical periods in Chinese universities. And if you don't toe the line sitting abroad, no more visas. You will never get back into China. It's not like Audrey Shushke, who can come and stay in the Taj Hotel and pontificate about our past. They have very tight control and they are generating their own work. And foreign scholars, without articulating why, are towing the line. I'm reading a book by a brilliant scholar in Bristol University, from which I'm learning a lot. And it's about Chinese history in the modern period, that is in the last 150 years. And it's very good because he's done a very thorough job. And then somewhere he says this story about a placard in a park, Chinese and dogs not allowed. He says this is actually fabrication.
Yeah.
It is fabrication.
It was Indians and dogs not allowed.
Whatever. He said this, but then he adds, you dare not challenge this because it's so deeply ingrained in Chinese popular culture that there was such a thing. So nobody challenges this, you see. So this is an illustration. This is not some game of liberal intellectualism, anything goes. Intellectual life serves the nation. That is how Europe got ahead. Intellectual life is subordinate to the survival and life of the nation. Yes, there is freedom, there is critique, but should not be routinely hostile to the entire project. And when they say, Hindutva, we are secular, ye to basically is bakwas. How do you mobilize the majority of Indians? And nominally, they are still Hindus. And I say nominally because Hindus are not Hindus, they are different castes in their consciousness. But how do you mobilize them in terms of what they are? You have to revive their past. You can't invent some secular reality which happened in 1976 with Indira Gandhi. So you have nowhere to go. You may critique that past, but excuse me, I am a historian of many societies, many cultures. Our past has many things of which we should be critics, but by and large, our past is a noble one. Our system did not survive on slavery.
Yes.
40% of our citizens, our people, were not slaves. Greece, that they all admire. Greece, that everybody aspires to. And Rome, which the British and the Germans wanted to copy in their imperium. They were brutal, cruel places. What did they contribute? They contributed property law. They said they had a legal system. Look carefully. The main thing they contributed was property law and criminal law, because that's how the ruling elite had to survive, to resolve property disputes, criminal law to keep people down. And they admire this. They admired because they were powerful and they conquered. We had great empires too in various periods of our history. But the levels of cruelty and brutality were much less because our society was imbued with a sense of the divine. Our
Mm.
sense of the divine is not out there who dictates to us. Sanatan Dharma does not have a divine who's up there somewhere in the heavens. He's inside you and me.
Yep.
And our goal in life is to find that divinity within us and be aware that every living creature has that divinity in them too.
In them
And
too.
we are therefore united as one people. You see, I have spoken long. I want to say something which I've kept to myself all these years. So I'm going to out it here on your program. First time. I've not shared it because I want to, for the first time, shamefully assert a degree of copyright. There's a brilliant demographer in my alma mater where I used to teach London School of Economics. And I have a very vast library at home, about 4,000 books.
Whoa.
Every room is floor to ceiling, you see. But I've been accumulating since the 70s and I never give away my books, you see. I keep everything. And at one time, LSC used to pay me to buy books, so I bought. Anyway, here goes. It suddenly occurred to me, they say Brahmins became so dominant and oppressive. One aside, when the Maratha warriors used to go to war, they used to say, we fight for our motherland and for our Brahmins.
Mm.
Can you believe that? That we are fighting for our Brahmins. The Brahmin, what not necessarily as our consciousness says, an individual. It was a disembodied institution because they carried
The knowledge.
historic knowledge of ourselves. So Brahmin was not necessarily an individual as such, but when you said Brahmin in that context, they meant the memory of our civilization in which these people are repositories.
That's
That is
true.
why they're precious. And like in Plato's Republic, they had a role in guiding governance without having wealth. That was the ideal. They were not going to be wealthy, but they had, and therefore they had an incentive to look at things objectively because they lived on royal patronage in mandirs and shakhas or wherever. But basically, they were not a business class which had accumulated wealth. Now, the question arose, why did Brahmins become so important? You know, the population of India in 200 BC was larger than Elizabeth in England. Our population in 200 BC was bigger than 1550 in the United Kingdom. Now, that tells you something immediately. We had a slightly large functioning society, right? By definition,
True.
with some degree of urbanization as well.
Mm.
The urban area may not have been more than 10, 20,000, but urbanization. So we needed a class of people who could keep records, at least of taxation,
Absolutely.
right? For governance, record keeping, of which taxation was an important part. We didn't have leaf in those days to write. We had tablets.
Yeah.
Leaf came
Stone.
later on. Huh? Leaf and all. There was some, but not used very much. For example, in Egypt, there is some evidence, but it was not in widespread use. Basically, it was tablets.
Yeah.
So what else do you have? What else do you have left for record keeping? Memory. So class of people developed with phenomenal capacity for memory. And a distinguished scholar who disputed the Aryan invasion theory said, the Aryans, having come, could not have memorized the scale of the corpus in the short period of time in which they are supposed to have created the Vedas. It was not possible. So they had to
Mm.
predate the so-called Aryans. Now we know from genetic evidence that is not even true.
Yeah.
And we are in a polyglot nation. We are all intermarried at some point in the past. I'm a Bengali, but I discover 80% of my genes are Baluch.
Wow.
Yeah, that was my reaction too. Anyway, be that as it may. So you needed a class of people who had phenomenal memory power. There was no internet 200 BC. There was no university you could go to, no books you could learn from.
So
How do
no
you
terabyte.
how do you transmit this memory? Father to son. There is no institution to do it. It has to go father to son to learn this. And even today, you'll see some of these little Tamil boys sitting in mandis reciting. They are part of that tradition, that old tradition. And my friend Bibik Devroy is part of that. His memory is terrifying. He can recite the whole of Shakuntala in Sanskrit from memory. This used to be our tradition. This talent has dissipated because of the modern world we live in. We don't need to have a memory. Everything is written down in books. But we had this. Now, Brahmins acquired this privileged position because they were essential for administration. And this carried on for generations. So they acquired this huge intellectual advantage of knowing everything and carrying it in their brains and transmitting it to their children. There was no conspiracy. As some scholars in Harvard say, there was no conspiracy. It was a necessity for society to function that you had a class of people who had phenomenal memory power and you perpetuated that through their children. In medieval Europe, on which there are so many magnificent books. And just the other day, I was reading about the monarchs in, I think, 900 AD and slightly beyond. Who were the advisors to the kings? They were all priests. Up to
Priests, the
13.
judges. The judges who used to sit behind the king.
No, also the guys, the cardinals who were telling the kings and all what to do, because they were the only people who were literate. They
Yeah.
were the only people who could read Latin.
Hmm.
Only after 1300, a separate class of people began to develop who were secular. So this is a parallel role, which we in our civilization, being that much bigger, developed to a high degree, and so the Brahmin class was created. And because they had intellectual capital, they have now become evil people. You blame them that they performed a great service over time, which carried on for a long time because this didn't dissipate. It carried on for more than 1,000 years because even after that, writing leaf was still not dominant. So these
Hmm.
people with phenomenal memory and knowledge had an advantage. But now their feeling is they should not be punished. Not they. Their great descendants ought to be punished, that they inherited this intellectual capital. We are now banishing them big time. You know, three clever people can transform the destiny of a country. How many have we lost? Three clever people with inventions who did not get a job in some field because they didn't meet the quota. We have to think about how this is working out. My solution to this is create enough places in all the major universities so those who are disadvantaged with lesser qualifications get admitted, but the general category, anybody with qualifications gets admitted. Why are we spending $100 billion a year in foreign fees? Let's at least make a start to allow people. Now, I met in fact, my colleague who's an army general, his daughter wanted to do medicine, couldn't get in because of quotas. Only way she could become a doctor was to join the army through the army
Heavens.
route,
Hmm.
which I'm sure you're familiar with. That is the one other way of becoming a doctor. So
Yeah,
this is a crazy system that we are exporting the most talented people in our society because of a quirk in our history. I am not against quotas as a reservation. There is a question of equity involved. I'm not against that. I'm just saying make the system a bit more sensible and rational.
yeah.
Don't make it a system where you want to destroy the talented people in order to get ahead. We can all have a role to play, and those who are disadvantaged should be given certain exemptions in exams. But the biggest favor to them, which is not happening, is people who are most disadvantaged should have the best schooling. The per capita spend on schooling for those we call Dalit or whatever term I hate, because these for me are my fellow citizens.
Likewise, I don't. I mean,
I,
it doesn't
I, I
make sense.
can't register this. I did
It
not know
doesn't
my
sense.
caste. I only found out my own caste after Suchitra Sen died. Suchitra Sen was a very good family friend, and I asked my cousin, how come in the newspapers they're calling her Sen Sharma? She's a Sen. She said, no, we all Sharmas. That is when I found out my caste antecedents. In Bengal, caste is not a big deal, perhaps during marriage, but otherwise it's not a big deal. People only look to see whether you came first in the exams. That is their obsession. That imtihan mein acha kiya ki nahi. So we need to overcome this, but I would spend a lot of time and effort to help those who are at the least privileged end, give them very good schooling,
True.
and then cut them off if their parents and grandparents are graduates. And that is what we are not doing. So at least spread the privileges more widely in that community. Don't keep giving it to those who have made it. Keep the privileges, but giving it to others in the community would be a morally correct thing to do. So
Hmm.
my argument in the end is, we need to change our narrative. For this, the school curriculum must change. I have a little model for changing the university curriculum as well, which I've shared with some leading scholars, and I was heartened by their reaction to me, which was, do it now, do it now. They felt it was so good. The reason I was thinking about this for a very long time is somebody many years ago sent me a listing of everything written on India and the social sciences. The list was so long, I almost fell off my chair. I said, how the hell are we going to deal with this hostile propaganda against us? We're not talking about 50,000. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of articles. We will never be able to keep up with this. So I came up with a scheme to make a difference to this. And that paper is still with me, and I've been told by somebody well connected that they will help me. Unfortunately, it will require 2.5, 3 crores in the first year to launch, which I am told nowadays is nothing in India. And then about 1.5 crore to keep going. And it's a beautiful plan to implement to rapidly change social science higher education in India, starting with history, anthropology, and sociology. Those would be my three targets, and then economics. Then we can go beyond. And it is doable. It would take about a year to unfold. And I have offered my services free of charge to supervisors. And a lot of scholars have to mobilize. But two great scholars have told me, do it, it can be done.
Hmm.
Now, unfortunately, this initial 3 crores, and I've said I don't want to handle the money, put it in the foundation. I'll just send them the bills for whatever spending that occurs. So there we are. I think we are going to be all right. But the most urgent thing I say to my friends who are critics of Modi Sarkar, please, 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 do not overdo it. Criticism is good because the people who criticize may learn from it. But this is all we have. And in this next decade, between Modi and maybe Yogi Adityanath, we will have turned the corner as a civilization. The economy is important, and I'm a political economist, but to me, that is something which will happen now.
Automatically. Today, it's
That
now the
will
time for
happen.
culture. Hmm.
Now it will happen, and we will get there, but we need to tweak the situation. And I think the issues I'm talking about are not very demanding and complicated. And one thing I've learned, because I've lived abroad for a very large part of my life, but I've been coming to India 5, 6 times every year from 2006. I lived in Delhi for 2 years in 2004. And one thing I'm learning, there is no shortage of talented people in India.
Nope.
There was a time we saying, oh, now my contribution is very important. I realized very quickly, log ke kuch kami nahi hai. Our system is at fault often in preventing these people from doing what they can do for themselves and Samaj. And B, I sat on the board of a company for all these 14, 18 years. And what I found out, that these board members were actually from very big corporations, public corporations, very, very big. I won't name them because then you know who they are. They were such people of integrity, complete integrity, with a deep sense of their duty to the public, and so very capable. So, we have all the ingredients. We've just got to use them more thoughtfully. And I'm afraid Civil society has a very important role to play, and that role will grow, and maybe the role of the government will diminish. But I'm afraid in the interim, the government needs to be proactive with some thoughtful intervention. But I'm hopeful, and am a great supporter of the current dispensation, and I look every day to see every success. And today is a good day with a change in criminal law.
Absolutely. So it's a historic day. I mean, I've been celebrating it since the morning. I've done two talks on it already, and I want to understand this entire thing. So how we can. This is one of the biggest decolonization activities that you can actually dream of. But sir, let me just say this: what you've told me is inspirational. Let me just put that across, because there's so many people talking about it in India, but I think the articulation that you've brought about is something that needs to be I mean, appreciated no less. There is just uh, a dearth of a line of thought and probably a plan that I think you have in your mind, which can be implemented, an implementable plan. I think a lot of people have plans, but how do you actually put it on the ground is something which is very different. And I can see that in your eyes, that you have an implementable plan that can be put into action pretty fast.
You see, the devil is in the detail, and
Yeah, absolutely.
nuts and bolts matter a lot.
Absolutely, sir. They do.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they do. There's no question. Professor Sir, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and I wish I can talk to you at least once a month so that I can learn from you. My request would be, don't forget this little boy, this little son of yours, because so that we can
You are doing
actually.
splendid work, Adi. Very good, and you have some superlative people. And I always mention G.S. Bedi every time I talk to you because I learned so much from him, and he gave a
Yeah.
really good lecture on quantum computing and its
Yes,
implications.
yes, yes, yes.
And
Thank you
there
so
are
much, sir.
others I also see. So, namaste. Okay.